sing along. When your day is night, hold on. Hold on. If you feel like letting go, hold on. If you feel like letting go, hold on. If you feel like letting go. 'Cause everybody hurts. Don't throw your hand. Oh, no. Don't throw your hand. Oh, no. Don't throw your hand. Feel like you're alone. No, 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 you're not alone. So hold on, hold on, hold on, hold
WETA, with a coalition of partners, welcomes you to the Wellbeing's Youth Mental Health Project. Hi, I'm Bill Pullman, and I'm honored to be with you as we launch this national campaign from public media. Wellbeings is a groundbreaking project at a very important point in time. Mental illness disproportionately affects our young people and the most disadvantaged populations among us. The growing mental health movement has set the stage for dramatic change, to raise awareness, to reduce stigma, to focus on prevention and early intervention, and the promise of more research for new treatments. Together, we can bring mental illness and discrimination out of the shadows, and it's not a day too soon. So thank you for being here today.
The signature documentary series in the Wellbeings campaign is Ken Burns Presents Hiding in Plain Sight, Our Mental Health Crisis. Produced and directed by Ewers Brothers Productions and written by David Blistein, the film will explore, through lived experiences, the youth mental health crisis in our country. Currently in production, this 4-hour documentary film is slated to air on PBS stations in spring 2022.
Wellbeings.org and hashtag Wellbeings will be adding content every week over the 2 years, including Brave Teens, where teen storytellers go on the record about their mental health journeys.
And Brave High, a digital feature-length documentary where students in high school productions share their mental health stories through spoken word, music, and dance without fear, shame, or stigma.
Out of the Dark, a short-form digital series that will profile lives transformed by mental health challenges, highlighting the power of difference.
PBS NewsHour's student reporting labs engage high school journalism students as correspondents that report on youth mental health from more than 150 high schools across 46 states.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it for Vegas PBS's virtual live stream event. As the introduction just showed, this is part of the National PBS Wellbeings Tour on youth mental health. It's created and produced by WETA as a public media station based in Washington, D.C. that brings you such standard programs as Washington Week, PBS NewsHour, and as we just mentioned, the Ken Burns documentaries. But also our partners are local stations like Vegas PBS, and we are very, very proud and privileged to be part of this discussion. To that point, let's talk a little bit about what we are going to be talking about today. We want to have a thoughtful discussion on mental health of youth. Now, this conversation is not always an easy conversation to have, but our objective here is to bring more awareness to the topic, give you resources and tools, and then also bring a fair amount of hope and optimism to the conversation that we have. I wanted to thank our partners, our local and our national partners. Would not be possible if we did not have their support. We thank you very much. One piece of housekeeping here is we want this to be very interactive and engaging. So you, the audience, if you have questions, we want to hear them. We don't want to hear them just at the end. As questions come up, please post them and we will get to them as we can. You can submit your questions by going to the comment section of the Vegas PBS or Wellbeing's Facebook or YouTube pages. Now, I want to introduce our panel. We'll get right to the discussion right after that. We have today Dr. Sheldon Jacobs, a licensed marriage and family therapist and author. We have Valerie Almirola, student at UNLV and a youth advocate at Hope Means, Nevada. Richard Egan, suicide prevention training and outreach facilitator at Nevada Department of Health and Human Services, the Division of Public and Behavioral Health. And then we have Reggie Burton, founder and president of the Avery Burton Foundation. To our whole panel, we are so happy to have you here. Thank you so much. Really looking forward to the conversation. And I'm just going to jump right into it. Richard, I want to start with you. We talked before our production here, and we talked about appropriate language, and you gave me some resources to look at, and I looked at those resources, and I think they're not just important for our conversation here, but they're important for the general public to understand what is appropriate conversation. So I wanted to start with that. And maybe we could just start with, why is appropriate language so important to any conversation you're having around youth mental health?
So when we look at conversations about mental health and suicide prevention, what's happened in our society is we built stigma and taboo around it. And some of that language change is how we prevent continuing with the suicide prevention taboo and stigma that is perpetuated by some of the language we use. So for instance, we don't want to say that somebody had committed suicide. We want to say somebody ended their life, just to change the conversation, pull away from the stigma and taboo about it, and be able to break down that awareness, bring that awareness out of the dark, and let our community members start talking about it instead of pushing it down inside and hiding it.
Now, one of the things we want to talk about here, of course, is being comfortable having maybe the uncomfortable conversations. And of course, sometimes you can get tied up in political correctness or the right types of words and phrases to use. Sheldon, Reggie, I want to bring you into the conversation here. Appropriate language is important. Can you give us some guidance on how to just talk, any conversation we're having related to youth mental health here? Sheldon, let's start with you.
Yes, I would say, I think that's a great question. And I'll say that, for youth, obviously, youth have their own vernacular and their own way of expressing themselves and dealing with things. And so as a mental health professional, I'm always aware of what that language is and I try my best to sort of to meet myself kind of halfway, so that they can understand, what I'm saying, and I can understand, what they're saying, and they feel comfortable, sharing with, I think that's the big piece of it is that comfortability part of it. And so, so sometimes I might ask them, if they're saying a certain word that maybe I'm not familiar with, I might ask them, okay, what is that word that you're saying? What does that mean exactly? And then in further conversation, I might use that word as well, to help sort of make them feel a little bit more comfortable.
Great point. Reggie, can you give us your perspective too? And maybe we can narrow it and talk a little bit about the difference here between mental illness and mental health. Sometimes those terms are interchangeable, and I know they don't mean the same thing.
Yes, I think the biggest piece of advice I can give to all the parents that are watching out there is that the best thing you can do is just be real and just be honest with your child. I think they tend to find these types of conversations awkward. That's a word that I often hear in my own house, and have heard in my experience. I think the things that parents can do to make that conversation about mental health less awkward is the best approach I can offer. For example, I think changing the conversation ever so slightly from, how's it going, to how are you feeling? I think those are just some slight things that we can do in our conversations with our young people. In terms of the clinical aspect, I'm a mental health first aider. So what that means is I'm not here really to diagnose. I'm here to really try to connect young people who are in crisis with resources that Richard certainly has, as well as Sheldon. So I won't necessarily get too much into the clinical aspect, but in terms of offering advice to parents, try to make these conversations less awkward.
Yeah, Reggie, it's a great point. And Valerie, I want to bring you in on the conversation too. Just changing that phrasing of how are you feeling is so important. I know that's something you have talked about, you have addressed before. Give us maybe some background or some insight or context on how to talk to youth about this, your peers.
Definitely. So I know that, I'm a UNLV freshman now, but very recently I was in high school. And I know that mental health terms and, mental wellness is something that's very well known, at least amongst the youth, right? So we're all very familiar with the different terms. We're all very familiar with the story of how it goes. The adults want to try to help, and we're here, and we don't really have the resources. We're very familiar with that. So what I want to focus on really is making sure that we have sort of the same understanding. The youth know what's going on, but do the adults know what's going on? And that's the thing. It's really listening to what the teens are saying. It's listening to them and being able to provide that listening ear and saying, how are you feeling? If they say, well, I'm feeling good, then try to dig a little deeper into how is it really going? How are you really feeling? How are you really doing in school? What's really going on? Not just, sort of leveling, just trying to go deeper into the subject to find out what the root cause is.
That's absolutely great advice. Thank you. Let's transition the conversation a little bit. I want to talk just about kind of where we are, the state of Nevada, when we're talking about mental health in youth. If we look at some of the statistics, they're not very shining. Nevada youth ranking for mental health is 51st in the U.S. Access to care and mental health, whether you're an adult or a youth, is also 51st. But I know those statistics do not tell the whole story. So I want to get perspectives from you. And Richard, let's start with you on this. Let's talk a little bit about the public awareness, the public knowledge involved here, and maybe walk me through, maybe if I'm an employer and I have somebody that their mood has changed. How good are we regionally? Let's talk just about Southern Nevada at connecting or having resources available. So in a very quick amount of time, you can gain some of the knowledge you need to be able to kind of understand what an employee is going through.
So there's many different parts of that. So the first one is resources that are out there. Absolutely, we can always use more resources in our community. But something our community members can do now is be more aware of the resources that are there. Like Nevada 211 is depository for resources. You can call them, or you can go on the internet and find different resources. And what we can do ourselves is utilize what we do have a little bit more effectively to connect individuals to the appropriate resource. When it comes to mental health and suicide prevention, there is mental health first aid courses, there's suicide prevention courses that anybody can take across this whole state through the Office of Suicide Prevention or many of the other organizations that we work with across the Nevada in the different communities with the different trainers that are out there. And we have the Nevada Coalition for Suicide Prevention. We have Hope Means Nevada. We have local coalitions out there in the community that can bring resources and training to individuals that want them or need them. When we have an employer that is concerned about an employee, there's 1-800-273-8255. There's also the Nevada 211. Everybody that answers those phones are trained in suicide prevention efforts and mental health resources. And understanding that sometimes it's just a phone call away. When we're talking about some of these organizations out there, we can actually help an organization be suicide safer within that organization and build what we call a suicide pyramid, a tiered system of individuals that can be educated in helping individuals, passing the person on to the next level, what we call a warm handoff, getting them to a professional that needs to sit down with them. And that's where the diagnosis and some of those other resources come in that my colleagues here can elaborate on.
Yeah, Reggie, let's go to you. Let's talk about the parent perspective here as part of that pyramid here. First off, give our assessment. I know you work specifically with a lot of parents here. What's the knowledge base generally? Is there pretty good awareness, pretty good knowledge of mental health in general?
So this is a very personal question for me, right? Because in 2017, my son Avery Burton just graduated from UNLV, had plans to attend the doctoral program in physical therapy. And the summer after his graduation in 2017, he suffered a major depressive episode. And he did end his life because of that. So that was a blind spot for me and my family as a parent. I knew very little about mental health. In fact, that fall, UNLV increased their tuition by $25 to pay for more services. At the time that Avery suffered his major depressive episode, there was a wait time of 4 to 6 weeks. Let me repeat that again for the people in the back. 4 to 6 weeks. My colleagues on the panel know that you don't have 4 to 6 hours in some cases, much less 4 to 6 weeks when someone is suffering mental health crisis. So I had to really get up to speed on what I didn't know. This was a parental blind spot for me, as I mentioned. So what did I do? I wrote a book called This is Depression. I wanted to warn parents out there about the dangers of depression. So I encourage everyone to go out and get that book because I don't hold anything back. I talk about everything from the drug issue that was involved with Avery in terms of self-medication. So I don't hold back on anything related to what happened with my son. 2, I started the Avery Burton Foundation. What we do is we offer scholarships to seniors, graduating seniors, and we ask them to write an essay about overcoming adversity. We've been very fortunate to have great support from the Vegas Golden Knights and others in our community. But the reality is we are a gambling town here in Las Vegas, but we should not gamble on mental health. And the last piece is with mental health, I had to add some skills to be able to do these types of talks and to do interviews on Good Day LA and in Los Angeles and go out and promote my book. I had to make sure that I was competent in what I was discussing. So I went out and got a certificate in youth mental health first aid as well as adult mental health first aid. So that was prior to the pandemic. So that's really helped me be able to relate and share information, provide educational resources that we do through our foundation. So I encourage people to go out to averyburtonfoundation.org to get those resources.
Thank you, Reggie. We appreciate that. And we're going to come back, especially to the mental health first aid aspect of this. I wanted to bring Sheldon into the conversation and talk about something you initially mentioned there, Reggie, is just the access to mental health care. We don't need to emphasize again that the long wait there. But let's talk about, the broader mental health system here. I mentioned that the access is something that we are ranked very low on, Sheldon, but can you give us some idea, give us some guidance if you're in a situation where you need mental health, you need therapy right now, what options are available for you?
I would say, first off, it really depends on, a couple of things. Number one is insurance. I think insurance is a driver to an extent. So if a person that's struggling with a mental health crisis and they have, let's say, private insurance, first thing I would encourage that person or those individuals to do is to look into their insurance to see what resources are available to them. Sometimes certain hospitals are linked to to a specific insurance or even certain providers. So that's first and foremost. Individuals who don't have private insurance, so I'm referring to like the non-insured or those with Medicaid or the different types of Medicaid. There's also agency providers in the community that offer a plethora of services, anything from individual counseling to group counseling to support groups. And then we have also a myriad of providers that offer free support groups. And support groups are is a modality that I think for a lot of people, they feel more comfortable talking about their problems or their issues in a group where there's other individuals that are struggling with the same issues or difficulties that they may be, right? So there's a lot of power in that, and research has shown that group counseling, can be as effective or more effective than individual counseling, depending on what the issue is. And so, when it comes to group counseling, also, which we've learned over the last couple of years, is in a college setting, most universities offer a wide variety of groups that focus on whether it be education, awareness, even process-oriented groups where they're focusing on more specific treatment issues. So because there's different types of groups as well. There's the psychoeducational groups where somebody may want to learn more about depression, or someone might want to learn more about anxiety. And so these are groups that offer more educational, more education, I should say. Where a lot of times, you're learning about, maybe the side effects, the symptoms that somebody with depression or anxiety may be exhibiting. But then you also have the process-oriented groups where somebody who maybe is struggling with domestic violence, or somebody is struggling with a specific crisis. And so you have other individuals in this group that have maybe similar struggles or similar crises that they're dealing with. And so again, groups are very powerful. There's a lot of value in groups, and also groups can be more cost effective. And so one of the things as providers, from the provider point of view, we're finding that in many respects, it's easier, for individuals to come to a group setting versus an individual therapy setting where it's more personal, more it's more up close and personal, if you will. And so I think a lot of times it comes down to meeting people where they are. And I think, especially for the groups of color, so indigenous populations, Latino populations, African American populations, we know there's a stigma when it comes to seeking help. And so one of the things that we're starting to see more and more is providers going into churches, where churches in a lot of respects are the pillars of like the Black communities and Hispanic communities.
And Sheldon, I'm sorry, I'm going to stop you right there. I'm going to stop you right there. We got to go to a clip, but let's come back. Let's talk about that. That's extremely important. And I want to tie in the current environment we're in and the COVID situation right now and how that works into some of the group sessions. We'll come to that in just a second. But I would like to go to a clip. As we are learning, mental health challenges come in many forms from all walks of life. We've already talked about that. This clip from Brave Teens highlights stories to see how others deal with the challenges and address the stigmas. Here are some tips from Abby, followed by ways you can get involved to help others by telling your story. Take a look.
Hey guys, it's Abby, and I wanted to talk about coping skills. So the first one that I use is probably one of my favorites. It's called the 5 senses breathing activity. Basically, when anxiety's high, you go through each of your 5 senses. So you would say, what's 1 thing that I can see? What's 2 things that I can hear? 3 things that I can taste? 4 things I can smell? And 5 things that I can touch. And it really helps to straighten out your thoughts in your mind and just get yourself collected. So, definitely a favorite of mine that I recommend. The second one, I kind of made this up. I call it the Post-it note game. No, not game, more just the Post-it note strategy. So I like to have a bunch of different bright colored Post-it notes. I write down either something I'm thankful for or just something that's on my mind, something positive. So, for example, I'm gonna write down, I am thankful for my mental health. So I'm gonna go ahead and rip it off, and I'm gonna show you where I put it. I recommend putting it somewhere where you constantly look, such as a mirror, maybe a desk, anything like that. So we got lots of fun stickers just to make it, you know, just positive. So let's go ahead on the sticky notes. I'm thankful for my mental health. Positive quotes. It's a good way to just have some positive reinforcement in life. And it helps us to just find that light and hold on tight to it. I hope you all stay safe.
The We Are Wellbeing's story wall is a central part of the wellbeings.org website, social media platform, and the Wellbeings National Tour. We are asking the public of all ages to submit personal reflections, videos, photos, and short stories to offer hope, to foster understanding, to build community, and break down stigma.
What does being well mean to you? What is the one thing you wish people knew about mental health? What is your passion? What's your story?
Video can easily be submitted via social media using the hashtag #wellbeings or emailed to info@wellbeings.org.
Stories can also be submitted by uploading to Dropbox and live at Wellbeings Tour events. The We Are Wellbeing Story Wall is made possible through generous support provided by Wellbeing's Youth Mental Health Project founding corporate sponsor Otska and Wellbeing's media partner People.
Well, thank you. Wonderful clip. And Valerie, I want to go to you. Sheldon, I know I said I'd go back to you. We'll come back to that in a sec. Valerie, I wanted to go to you just because the clip mentioned stigma and gives a lot of different options and opportunities, storytelling, videos, to potentially break down the stigma and get youth to talk. Know that's something that you have a lot of personal experience with. Can you speak to the youth here? Can you talk about those and maybe other methods of breaking down stigma and what stigma means again to you and your peers?
Certainly. So I struggled with depression, I would say my freshman year of high school. It was just a very, very sad time in my life where I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't really know what I wanted to do or what I what I stood for, why I was alive. And I think that's something that's very common among the youth, and it's something that we definitely don't talk about as much as we should. As I've mentioned before, we do already have this preconceived notion of what mental health is and what mental illness is and what the bottom line of it is, right? We've been explaining the process, but when it comes to purpose and why we're actually here and how that deals with our mental health, how that attaches to our mental health, we never really talk about that. And I find that that was the root problem for me, that I just didn't know how to be happy. I didn't know what would make me happier. I didn't even know why I was here, right? And that is why I want to spread the message that, you know, if anyone is still wondering out there, that you do have a purpose and you do have a reason for being alive. You do have a reason for being here and for watching now. You know, you're not just watching this by accident. You're watching this to better yourself and to better those around you. That is the main message that I want to spread today.
Sheldon, Reggie, I want to come to both of you with this too. As Valerie mentioned, and Sheldon, let's start with you. This feeling of not really knowing how to express yourself or even know if you're in a problem. I mean, people deal with depression, they deal with down feelings. Where is the tolerance? At what point do you identify or do you address that there is a bigger problem here that needs help?
You know, I would say, I mean, obviously, you know, every person is different when it comes to how they deal with things, how they cope with things. And so I would say that, you know, first and foremost, if you as a person, if you're struggling with a mental health related issue and your functioning is becoming impacted, meaning, you know, if you're, you know, not able to go to work or perform on the job like you used to, or if you're, you know, having some, you know, difficulties with in relationships. So if we're having these sort of these abrupt changes in behavior that are impacting, you know, your well-being, you know, that's an indicator that something more is going on, something more on the line is going on, and you know, I think it's also a sign that, you know what, I need some additional support, I need some additional help to kind of get me through this. But again, it can be different from person to person. And so that's kind of the balancing act, right? I mean, it's kind of figuring out, okay, when is the time, the most appropriate time for me to seek help? And for many people, sometimes it might not even be, you know, seeking, you know, help from a professional therapist, but it could be just reaching out to a friend or a family member and saying, you know what, I'm struggling right now. And so having that person where you can go to and to talk about what is going on, because that in itself can be very therapeutic and very healing. And so I think, again, you know, kind of looking at, you know, in words and saying, okay, what is it that I need? What is it that, you know, may help me to get through this difficult time? You know, is it professional help, or is it, you know, something more or less along the lines of, you know, reaching out to a friend and talking about some of the things that I'm struggling with.
And Reggie, let's get your take on this as well, please.
Sure. For me, it's simple. You know, I think, you know, in the previous segment, just to kind of answer that question, I do feel like the conversations are getting better amongst parents, being able to talk about these uncomfortable discussions. But I think we need to keep working at it so it's more normalized in our daily lives. You know, I think prior to what happened with me and my son Avery, you know, most parents, if you ask them how things are going with their kids, everything was great. After they found out what happened with my family and with Avery and his struggle with a major depressive episode, you know, I found that parents were coming to me, people were coming to me and wanting to express more and share more. Hey, I didn't tell you this, but my daughter has been cutting. Or I didn't tell you this, but my son has been on antidepressants. So I do find that there is some change in our conversations amongst ourselves as parents. What I would also say, based on my experience and what I learned in our situation, is that, again, we need to try to create opportunities and avenues for these young people to have these conversations. So we have to give them permission and reach out and be active listeners and engaged listeners. As far as the students, I go to classrooms or do them virtually now in this pandemic that we're in, and I do hear some common themes around feelings of not having a voice, feelings of just not being able to quite understand what their purpose is. So for the parents, for the educators out there, believe what you hear and what you see.
Reggie, great point. Richard, I want to go to you. Of course, we are in such a unique situation right now with COVID-19, and it is affecting not only the way that our students are able to communicate, but the social and emotional learning and things like that. The intangibles that are taught sometimes in classrooms are not as acute. Can you talk a little bit about that, about the importance of that, or maybe provide some other resources or opportunities to what Reggie's point was, that are available right now for youth to be able to connect with other youth in this manner and talk about these things?
So the connectiveness to school is the number one resiliency factor for students. And so with the pandemic and everything going on, they're not really as connected with their friends and their schools as they normally would be. So that safety net is not there. And what we found is we have to be innovative on how we interact with the community and how we get our youth to interact with each other. I'll give you an example. My own 16-year-old daughter, she told me one day recently that she was missing her friends. And I told her, okay, have a Zoom room at lunchtime with your friends. We'll set it up in the morning so that you can interact with your friends. Tell me who they are, give me their addresses, and I'll go deliver lunch to their front door so that you guys can have lunch together in a Zoom room, because you're in that distance learning, which is preventing the normal interactions. So we need to be innovative on how we do the interactions, not just for our youth, but our community members, our families, our friends. That innovative part is using Zoom rooms or having time on the telephone and actually talking, getting away from the phone and having conversations. But sometimes our community members need other resources, need other team members to come in and help. And one thing that we do have in this state that is available is our amazing mobile crisis team that's across this whole state. They can actually be in a home with a youth in about 30 minutes in the Las Vegas Valley. Times vary across the state, but we have two phone numbers for that. We have 702-486-7865. For rural Nevada and southern Nevada. We also have a northern Nevada number, which is 775-688-1670. An amazing team of individuals that can come into a home and help stabilize the home between 30 and 45 days, help them navigate that resources that are in the community so that the insurance companies are taken care of, the proper therapist is available, and maybe medications or anything like that on that scope of it. But where we can start is building connectiveness, because that's the number one resiliency factor for mental health concerns and or suicide prevention efforts.
I want to come back to the mobile centers that you're talking about here. First off, can you give us some recommendations that, are these available for anybody that might be dealing with what they would consider some form of mental health crisis? Is this elevated, to a higher level? And you give some suggestions of when you should be reaching out and accessing those resources.
So we have that mobile crisis team. They are available 24/7, 365 across this whole state. And you can call them as long as the team is helping a youth in a family environment, then you can call them. And they will help you navigate the system. If you need somebody to actually come out to the home or do it virtually, depending on the circumstances, they can do many different things. But they understand the insurances, they understand what resources are out there in the community, and we're building that infrastructure so that we have that team available for the families. We're doing better on the adult side and bringing some of those resources, and our resiliency project, because of COVID-19, we have 38 ambassadors across the state of Nevada that can be called upon to help a family look for resources. They're embedded in the crisis call center up in Reno, and they are embedded in 211 for the Nevada resources.
Sheldon, I know you wanted to add too. We got about 2 minutes. And then after that, Valerie, if I can't get to you right away, after our next clip, I want to come back to you, talk about the connectivity side again. Sheldon, go ahead.
So I was going to say, from a provider standpoint, for us to be a little bit more creative when it comes to connecting to those that are struggling or those that are in need. And so one of the things that I wanted to illuminate is that, we are in a mental health epidemic right now, right? It's very widespread, and I think as a community we have to come together. We have to work together, and I think that we're starting to see that in Nevada as well as here locally in Las Vegas, where providers are becoming more creative when it comes to reaching and connecting with those that are in need. And so one of the things that one of my efforts is, I'm trying to go into the community and going into community centers, going into the churches, and talking about mental health, because it starts with awareness. You can't effectively have intervention and prevention without awareness and education. And so it starts there. And I go back to my cousin. My cousin, who was a year younger than me, about 20 years ago, had a psychotic break during his first year of college, and my family was up in arms. We didn't know what to do. It was a very devastating moment for all of us. And so NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness, which I'm the vice president of the Southern Nevada chapter, really came and wrapped their arms around my family during this very difficult time. And my cousin, because of the support, it changed his life. And really, it saved his life. And so I think that, the point is, we as a community, we need to continue to wrap our arms around our community during this challenging time.
Thank you, Sheldon. Great point. We got another clip. We do have a celebrity montage. Let's take a look.
It's time to change the conversation about mental health.
When you know something is wrong.
When you feel alone. When you can't explain what hurts.
When every day is a struggle.
When you can't ask for help.
When your friend or family member seems fine on the outside.
But hurts on the inside. Sometimes I feel as though I'm the only one that feels. But I know that's not true.
We can change.
We can change. We can change.
We can make a difference.
There's power in our difference.
We can support each other.
We can fight stigma.
We say it's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay to have a mental health condition.
We all want to feel heard.
To find hope.
And to live in a world without stigma.
Without discrimination.
And we are a force to be reckoned with.
I am not what happened to me.
I am how I overcame it.
Stand with us.
And discrimination in mental health.
You can see the person, not the condition.
You can build understanding.
You can play your part.
The conversation changes with me.
With me.
With me.
We are well-beings.
We are all well-beings.
Today, I want to address the question, what does being well mean to me? For me, being well means that the following 4 areas of my life are pretty balanced, and I'm kind of devoting a lot of time to each one of them. So those 4 areas include friendships and relationships, physical activity, nutrition, and a time where I can work on something that makes me feel genuinely fulfilled and happy. So not like schoolwork or anything or productivity wise, just like working on, like, I don't know, drawing or going outside or like skating, kayaking, just stuff like that that makes you feel happy and good. When I do check in with all 4 areas of my life, usually I feel pretty well and I'm kind of at that high point. But there are times when, for example, I feel isolated, and that's maybe because I haven't reached out to any of my friends on that day or to any other people in my life, and I've kind of shut myself away in my room for the whole day. Those are the times that my wellness kind of drops a little bit, just because I'm not checking in with that area of my life. Same thing where if I fuel my body with foods that my body doesn't react well to, so the nutrition aspect, then I won't feel good. And so basically being well to me just means that you're taking care of all the different aspects of your life and you're treating yourself as a whole human being, you know, because we have so many parts to ourselves and so many aspects that we need to constantly devote our time to develop. And as long as I'm doing that, I usually feel pretty well. And of course, when I'm feeling well, that means my mental health is well too. And honestly, my mental health really correlates with how much physical activity I do, my nutrition, my friendships, relationships, and how often I do something that fulfills me. So it's all intertwined. And yeah, that's basically what being well means to me.
And that was Anastasia. That was another Brave Teens clip. And Valerie, I do want to go back to you. As Anastasia mentioned, there's so much interdependency in those 4 well-being areas that she talked about right there. I wanted to talk specifically about the connectivity side, as I mentioned before we went to the clip. And I want you to talk a little bit about, being that you are, I would assume, a very connected person. Your age group, of course, are very connected. We've talked about Zoom meetings and things like that. How important is it to have that connectivity right now to be able to engage with your friends, even if it is virtually? And can you give us some tips of how you particularly are doing it and what your recommendations would be to others?
Of course. So I found that obviously as of late, we've had to particularly carve out specific chunks of our day in order to make time to reach out to others, to connect with other people. Now that, you know, we don't see each other on such a regular basis, especially at school, we have to actually make the effort to reach out to others. And it doesn't just have to be friends. I mean, obviously family members and people that you're acquainted with. It's very, very important. On the connectivity side, I know that we've all been connecting pretty much through social media and through those types of platforms. And on that note, it's very important to fill social media with positive messages in order to be able to connect with one another on a positive note. You know, like saying these things are the things that are happening now, but it's going to get better. You know, this is what's going on now, but there is still hope. And I feel that that is the best way to take to social media all the resources that we're learning about today, and be able to infiltrate it through social media, because that's what we have been taken to. You know, these are great perspectives. These are great tips, and I know that the youth needs to hear them now more than ever.
Valerie, what a great point. And Richard, I want to go to you again. Prior to our program here, we did talk about the influence of social media again, and what you've called connectiveness. Of course, we've already talked a little bit about that too. Valerie's talking about the positive side. There's a lot of pitfalls to social media too that we need to be aware of. Can you give us some more context there?
So, depending on how individuals utilize social media can be a great thing to connect to family and friends and like-minded people of likes that you have and they have, and being able to connect. But also, it can cause isolation because it's not real connectiveness in many cases. When you have family members that you're reaching out to and sharing pictures with, you have a background with that family member that you're enhancing with the social media. When you don't have that enhancement being accomplished by social media and the person you're interacting with, you may not actually know who they are. It could be actually in reverse causing an isolation factor. There's a documentary out there, Social Dilemma from Netflix, which explains some of these things that might be going on in the background of social media. And so as parents, we want to be careful and understand that social media can have an isolation factor also that will prevent some of those real connections from occurring.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, I just wanted to reiterate this: social media for resources and things like that, supplementary, but definitely the interconnection, even if it has to be via virtual means, is very, very critical here.
Absolutely. And social media is a little bit different than the Zoom room aspect. Zoom room aspect, we need to interact with individuals, put the cameras on, have conversations. When you're on social media platforms, those platforms might cause an isolation factor that we need to be aware of.
Gotcha. Sheldon, I'm sorry, Valerie, please.
Thank you. I think that it's very important to know, as well as to the point that Richard is making, that while it is very, very important that we do carve out those chunks of time for Zoom and for those types of sort of conference calls, it's also important to note that most of the teenagers are taking to social media instead of reaching out to their friends in that type of way. They're taking to platforms like TikTok, like Instagram, like Twitter, instead of actually making the time for Zoom. So that's why I mentioned the point that it's important for these resources to be integrated into those platforms. That way, when they're already on there, they can have that glimmer of hope and be reminded of the things that are yet to come.
Thank you, Valerie. Great point. Great advice. Sheldon, I want to go to you next, and I want to talk a little bit about, we've kind of skirted around this issue. We haven't hit it direct on yet, but let's talk about some of the cultural background and some of the social norms involved here, potentially of specific racial or ethnic groups here that could change the conversation really around mental health and somebody that is in crisis. Can you give us a little bit of insight in that, please?
Yes, I can. So I'll say, so growing up, I heard all the black, not all, but a lot of the black men in my family would often say, I'm not going to the doctor. I'm afraid of what they may tell me. And so I grew up kind of hearing, men that I looked up to in my family, talk about this trepidation that they had regarding, healthcare providers. And then as I got older, I started hearing it within the larger context of of the African American race and some of the shame that was attached to seeking outside help, especially help from outside of the family, right? And so one of the things that I started doing as I went through grad school and graduated and became a licensed marriage and family therapist was making it sort of my mission, to chip away at that stigma and those myths as it pertains to seeking help and as it pertains to mental health even, right? And so that's one of the things that I've been trying to do because I hear this all the time where, a lot of people, and I hear this a lot within the Latino culture as well, where, there's this shame associated with, seeking help. There's a shame associated with this mental health and having a mental health related issue. And so how do we bridge that, right? And so one of the things that, I started seeing more and more is that people were more comfortable, talking to therapists or advocates or mental health professionals that look like them, right? And so because we think about it, when we see therapy, portrayed in television, or when we see mental health portrayed in television, a lot of times it involves people that usually are Caucasian, right? And so there's that taboo piece to it as well, right? And so kind of really changing the narrative, changing the myth that, no, we all struggle and we all need support to kind of help us get through whatever it is that we're getting through. So that's kind of been my messaging. The other thing is too, looking at where people feel most comfortable in, looking at their environments. For some people, it's the home settings. So I know that, for a lot of providers, a lot of providers in our community, they go out into the homes because that's where a lot of people feel most comfortable is in their homes. Or I mentioned the church. A lot of times people will talk and seek advice from a pastor before they'll seek advice from a mental health professional. And so getting, pastors in our community to change that messaging and say, it's okay to pray. Because I hear it a lot, pray away your problems. And there's nothing wrong with prayer, but I think that, we need more clergy and more spiritual leaders to kind of say, mental health is real. And there's professionals, within our churches, there's professionals within the community that can help you address this issue. So again, meeting people where they are and trying our best to really, really chip away, at these stigmas, because the stigma is real. It really is. That shame that's attached to it, it is real. And I saw that firsthand with my family. When my cousin, had a psychotic break, initially my family didn't know what to do. right? They didn't know what to do, and we kept it in house because we didn't want other people knowing, what was going on. But one thing I give my family credit, I give my aunt credit for is, seeking the help. My cousin was, struggling with his mental health issue.
Yeah. I wanted to come back to what you said about the workforce there. Are we seeing a lot of persons of color in therapist positions like you? Are we seeing more of that than maybe we saw 10 years ago?
Yes, we are actually. In fact, I started a coalition that's called a coalition that's focused on addressing the numbers in terms of getting more people of color, invested and interested in the field of mental health. And so my coalition is called the Minority Mental Health Coalition. And so I've providers from different backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds that come together. We were meeting, once a month. That now is moved towards quarterly. And so one of the things that we do is we go into the schools and talk about mental health to kind of get students interested in mental health, to get students, who are curious in the field, provide them more information and more knowledge about mental health. And so yes, and I'll say here in Las Vegas, we do have a very diverse community of providers actually. And so, and we are building on that. So I'm pleased to say that yes, we are making those changes at every level.
And Reggie, you wanted to add, please do.
Yeah, absolutely. To Sheldon's point, I think we can't emphasize enough the role of cultural competency and how it plays out in therapeutics. I can think back on my own personal experience with my son, Avery. I had a relative who came out from Louisiana to attend his service, and we certainly appreciated her doing that. However, I was really kind of taken aback by part of the conversation, which centered around religion and faith, and it kind of delved into, if only he had been more religious, then he kind of what Sheldon was saying earlier, he could have, prayed, the demons away, so to speak. I think we really need to be careful in how we're having, these conversations. I don't think I've ever can remember a time when someone had a cancer diagnosis and someone came up to them and said, hey, it's too bad you didn't go to church last week, otherwise you wouldn't have gotten cancer. That's just something we don't do. We need to treat mental health like a real illness. And until we start doing that, I think our conversations can get a bit muted. Beyond that, I think in terms of cultural competency, I think we need to talk about why that's important. When I was writing my book, This Is Depression, I think at the time, this is about 2 years ago, the vast majority of the psychiatric field was white. And I think it's been noted that there have been some strides, certainly here in Las Vegas and Nevada where we are. But I think on a national level, that's a trend that I hope that we can, address when we're having these conversations. And I think about the times that we're in right now we're coming off a summer with a lot of racial strife and a lot of racial tension. And there's a lot of trauma that we don't talk about that, families have. And how do we talk about these things? How do we talk about a George Floyd or some of the other police shootings and, some of these things that can have traumatic impacts? How do we discuss those things? And then beyond that, I can remember just promoting, my book and being in a bookstore with a young family, a mom who was Mongolian and Japanese, and her son was also Mongolian Japanese, about 11 years old. And she was asking if my book would help her. And, I try to do what I always do. I try to listen and understand what her issues were. And as we got into the conversation, it seemed to me that there was some bullying going on. So the case was her child had moved into a new school district. I was in a bookstore in Torrance, California. And, being that he was a mixed Asian heritage, he was having some troubles with some of the kids in a predominantly white area. And I told her, I said, who is your healthcare provider? And she told me, and I said, on Monday, this was a Saturday, I said, on Monday, you need to ask your healthcare provider for a culturally competent therapist. So I'll repeat that again for the people in the back, a culturally competent therapist. And when I told her that, she had never heard that phrase before. Her son had been in therapy for 6 years. He was 11, so half his life. And she was literally in tears. I had to hug her. I didn't know what else to tell her. I just gave her a hug. So when we talk about cultural competency, we also have to talk about why that is important. We have to flip the script on the conversation.
Reggie, wonderful advice. Thank you for that story. Wonderful context. We want to go to a clip again, but I also want to just take a moment and acknowledge our sponsors and our partners who have engaged with the Wellbeings Initiative here. The resources and the financial support have helped us amplify the message of how important mental health is to our youth. Very, very important, and we thank you. We want to show another clip here, and this is an interview done by one of the PBS NewsHour student reporters. Her name is Skylar Jordan, with the president and CEO of Otsuka America Pharmaceutical Incorporation, Mr. Kabir Nath. Let's take a look at that.
Hello and welcome. I'm Skylar Jordan. I'm an alumni of the PBS NewsHour Student Reporting Labs program at Desert Pines High School in Las Vegas. Student Reporting Labs, or SRL as we like to call it, has partnered with Wellbeings on this important national youth mental health initiative. One of Wellbeings' key partners is Otsuka America Pharmaceutical Inc., and I am here with the president and CEO, Kabir Nath. Welcome, Kabir.
Thanks so much, Skylar. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Otsuka's purpose statement is "We defy limitations so others can too." Can you share what that means to you in relation to youth mental health and well-being?
First, our purpose statement, to defy limitations so that others can too, really is more than just a purpose statement to us. It really does guide everything we do. And as a company very focused on mental health, it actually really reinforces that strong connection to helping others overcome their challenges. So what does it mean? It means we do our best to make products, to provide services that help everyone, youth in particular, achieve more, overcome their own limitations in the sense of mental health, and that together we can do so much more for the patients and the communities we serve.
The pandemic has put such a profound effect on our mental health. I know for me personally, my dad was recently diagnosed with COVID about a week ago, and just that kind of threw a nail into our entire family. It made us rethink our priorities. It made us realize, what was important. It was so hard because we couldn't see him. We couldn't really talk to him, but we tried to explain to him how much we loved him in as many ways as we could. And just having that made me realize how important my mental health was and how I really had to take a break and kind of review things, especially over the past year. So I want to ask you, how has your thinking about youth mental health changed over the past year for you?
Thanks. And first of all, I'm really sorry to hear about your dad, and I very much hope that he's doing okay and is on the path to recovery. So yes, this past year has been terrible in so many ways. Clearly, the loneliness, the anxiety, the frustration that everyone has felt. And that's been for adults and everyone across the world. But clearly, for young people, education has been completely upended. Most schools have moved to some combination of virtual and very limited presence. So all of us are suddenly finding ourselves living in unexpected, extended families with really no boundaries between family life, work life, school life, college life. And that's incredibly unsettling. That change of routine and so on is incredibly unsettling for everyone. And so I think, at Otsuka, unfortunately, we're very conscious of the fact that this is having a dramatic effect on people's mental well-being. In addition, we have this phenomenon that we miscall social distancing, but it's actually physical distancing. So you actually can't, we crave human contact, we crave touch, we're not getting that. You can't even physically hang out with your friends, see each other's and so on. And I think, it's made social media the even more dominant form of interaction, of dialogue and so on. And that we know comes with its own challenges around all sorts of things that can happen online and so on as well. So yeah, I'm sadly acutely conscious of the fact that this has been a really tough year for young people in particular, and how it's really essential that we talk about that and encourage them to talk about that as well.
And looking forward, so many families and communities will continue to face mental health challenges. So, what do you think that we can do to recognize people who are going through things and helping each other out?
So, it really does start with communication. As long as people do not feel comfortable to open up to talk about their own struggles and challenges, it's very hard to provide help and support. So I would strongly encourage everyone, if you are feeling uncomfortable, lonely, miserable, if you have these feelings of anxiety, talk to somebody about it. Talk to your friends, talk to peers, maybe talk to your parents, talk to other adults, depending on the circumstances. But also look out for each other. I think, certainly when I was growing up and where I was growing up in the UK, it was absolutely taboo to talk about mental health issues. Not only do we not know how to recognize them, but you wouldn't bring them up with your friends, with your peers, and so on. That, I believe, has changed, but it has to continue to change. You have to be vigilant, look for the signs, and much better to actually initiate a conversation and be brushed off than to feel that you never started the conversation or never tried to have that conversation.
A good part of communication really comes with therapy. I know a lot of my peers would benefit from therapy, but I also know that it's really hard to find a therapist, and definitely to be able to afford regular care. What is one key thing that teens really need to know about how to find a therapist?
So it's a great question. And unfortunately, you're right. There is a real supply demand issue here. The ability to access a therapist, or even if a mental illness becomes serious, a psychiatrist, is incredibly hard. But I think there are resources. There are communities that offer resources such as mental health counseling programs, phone hotlines, even online resources. But I think above all, it's your peers, having the ability through your peers to network with others. And if you can make an appointment with a trained mental health care professional, please try to do that, because ultimately, serious illnesses, serious concerns must be addressed by a trained person. But I think starting with ensuring that you have a network of peers and adults that you can talk to first, even before you're able to find that therapist, is really, really important. You shouldn't also make it dependent on finding a therapist. You need to use each level of support that you can in stages.
As part of the Student Reporting Labs program, high school students across the country are producing stories about mental health. What kind of stories would you like to see?
What I think would be great would be to see the positive stories of those who have recovered from their own mental health challenges or helped others to do so. I think in this time in particular, it's incredibly important that we see those powerful, uplifting stories that can encourage and motivate others.
Thank you so much for talking with us today, Kabir. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Skylar. Thanks for having me on.
Well, what a great interview. And Valerie, I know you have something you want to add. I'll give you that moment to do that. And to the point of the interview there at the end of these uplifting stories, potentially you could also share an uplifting story that you have. But please, I know you wanted to add something. Please do that.
So thank you so much. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the youth, right? Which is why we're having this panel to begin with, youth amongst mental health. I know that it has been mentioned a couple of times throughout this, that the adults are getting better at the discussion, and that they are the ones that need to be normalizing it a little bit more, the clinical terms, and knowing more about what's going on. But in terms of the youth, if I could bring in that perspective, I think that mental illness is something that's a bit over normalized amongst the youth. In fact, I wouldn't be lying if I said that a lot of people, a lot of my friends even in the past have joked about suicide, have joked about mental illness, it's become something that's over normalized, right? Something that's normal. And that's a problem because while we're not identifying it for what it really is, right? That this is serious, that these are people taking their lives. These are people who are depressed. These are people who are anxious. These are people who are struggling. And it's very important now more than ever to understand that we need each other and we need support and that we need to be able to talk, not necessarily in the clinical sense, but just to be able to have that open discussion of saying, hey, I'm here for you. And even though I can't be with you right there at this very moment, I'm here for you virtually, and I'm here for you if you ever need to talk. It's not always about being correct in the clinical sense, but just having an open heart and being able to discuss whatever it is that's really happening. And I think that amongst youth, we really need to get more serious about this. This isn't, it's not a game. It's not something to joke about. This is serious. And I believe that one of the reasons why sometimes teenagers tend to joke about it is because they think that it's normal, and because that's the only way that they know how to cope with it, how to deal with it, because they don't know the resources, or they don't know how to improve, and they don't think that it's going to get better. So it's very important now more than ever to spread the message of hope, and which is why I mentioned before, if anyone out there is wondering, you do have a purpose. There is a reason for your life. You are alive for a purpose, and don't let anyone tell you any different, not even yourself.
And Valerie, really quickly, a uplifting story that you could share with us, please.
An uplifting story that I would share would be the first one that comes to mind would probably be my own. I was in a very, very bad place mentally my freshman year of high school, and that slowly progressed. It just kept snowballing into even worse things, where finally I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to turn to. And it wasn't until I picked up this very special book to me that I read in there that I did have purpose, that I wasn't alive just because, that I wasn't an accident, that I had a reason for being, and that I could make myself better, that I could have the opportunity to improve, and that I could make a difference in someone else's life.
Really, really important. And I think that's a great segue. A lot of the things you just talked about, Valerie, talk about the prevention side of this. We've talked about youth that are in crisis. We haven't talked as much about the preventative measures we can. You mentioned coping skills. Sheldon, I want to get back to you on that in a second. But Richard, I want to go to you and just, can you talk a little bit about building resiliency here and how important that is in preventative measures?
So when you're building resiliency, sometimes it comes in the form of going through a crisis and understanding that you can get through whatever is going on around you. When you're talking resiliency, and Valerie put it to a very good point, having people around you and having conversations, open conversations that are helpful when you come across a crisis in your life. That's part of being resilient. So in the state of Nevada, we encourage social emotional learning amongst our elementary students, and that social emotional learning teaches that resiliency factor. Our families teach resiliency factor, our communities teach resiliency factor. And so everything in our past makes us who we are today. And sometimes those things that have occurred in our past make us stronger to get through a particular life crisis. An example would be that I believe that children should have pets. As they take care of pets, they learn how to take care of them. When the pets pass on, the youth learns how to grieve. And if somebody has not learned how to grieve at a younger age, perhaps at an older age, that can be very difficult when they lose a family member or something along those lines. And so that's just one example of being resilient, is you go through life crises and show a resolve at the end. So when something else comes up, you can get through it possibly a little bit easier, or maybe a little bit more steady.
And Sheldon, I wanted to come to you. Something that Valerie talked about there that is really, really important is this overgeneralization that's leading to almost a diminished importance to something like teen suicide. Can you give us some recommendations, some ways to build coping skills, as Valerie mentioned, that takes away maybe this overgeneralization that she is seeing around her peers?
Yes. So I would say first off, vitamins, I'm sorry, let me go back. Our coping tools are like vitamins from a mental wellness standpoint. And so I think that for each individual, I think it's important to find coping tools that are effective for them, especially during times of need or times of crisis. And so something that might work for me may not work for Valerie, or something that might work for Richard may not work for Mr. Burden. So for me, something that really helps me is exercise. Exercise, it really takes me to a place mentally where I'm able to sort of forget about what's going on around me, all the stressors that are going on in my life that are encompassing me. I'm able to really put those in the back burner and to really focus and to really to lower whatever anxiety or whatever stress that I'm experiencing. And so I advise everyone to find certain things that that maybe they're passionate about. It could be music, it could be reading is a big one. So for young people, I say music and music, reading, maybe there's magazines, there's connecting on social media, whatever the case may be, finding what that outlet or what those tools might be. Because like I said, for a lot of people, it's kind of it's a lifelong journey, trying to find what is effective when it comes to dealing with stress and dealing with things that are going on in their lives. And so I encourage everyone to find what those things are. And I think a lot of times it starts with things that you like, whether it be hobbies, whether it be something that you're passionate about. It usually starts there, and for most of us, we can all say that there are a handful of things that we enjoy. And so why not utilizing those things as coping tools? Because we all need it, especially during this time now with the pandemic, and we've all have experienced stressors with everything that's been going on. And so I think that obviously probably most of us have developed some situational stressors or mental health issues because of everything that's been taking place, the uncertainty of this life, right? So we've had to rely on sort of our coping mechanisms to help us to get through. And so I think it's the same for all those young people out there. Find different things to kind of help you to get through it. It is very important. And also for our parents, please, I plead with you to listen to your kids. Listen. I'm hearing from a lot of our children in the community that their parents aren't listening. So a lot of times they're afraid to go to them about problems or issues or concerns. So parents, please listen. Because the more you listen, that in itself can be another coping mechanism for not only for yourself, but also for your child.
Sheldon, great advice. Thank you. Thank you so much. Now, before we go, we have a preview from Ken Burns' new documentary, Hiding in Plain Sight, Our Mental Health Crisis, which will chronicle mental health issues faced by young people in the United States. This 4-hour film will air in April of 2020. Let's take a look at that clip.
The only thing I know how to do is to share my own story and my own experience. I can't tell anyone what they can't see for themselves, but I can tell them what it was like for me, what happened to me, and what it's like now that I have recognized my own illness.
It was something in the back of my head, really. It was not something that I didn't really worry about.
My dad was an alcoholic, and just like the anxiety of him coming home at night.
It's a strange thing to look back on and think to myself, I really didn't care about anything at that point.
I remember a lot of nights where I would sit in my bed and cry, like for hours after hours.
I felt a lot of pain inside, and I couldn't explain that. I couldn't relay that to other people outside.
The feeling is like walking through, it's like being pulled down, being pulled into like quicksand.
It affects my daily life all day, every day.
To go to school, you know, you put on a face, a facade, you're happy, you're bubbly, and then you eat lunch alone in the bathroom.
I started to self-harm. I learned it in a book that I read.
I'm tired of the voices. I'm tired of everybody labeling me and saying that I'm crazy.
What happens to people with a serious mental illness is that, just like a serious cancer, it begins to metastasize. It turns into disability.
I remember waking up and being in the psych ward and being like, what am I doing here? I had a very high opinion of myself.
It gets complicated by substance abuse.
Drugs and alcohol worked very well for me because they took that anxiety that I had and that sense of isolation, and they eliminated those things.
Drugs and drinking, and that was kind of my excuse, like that outside excuse to match up that feeling of powerlessness inside.
When I finally did start to think oh, I'm probably an addict, I was like, no, you're just lying to yourself, you know?
When the suicide rate goes up, nobody even knows about it.
I still had a whole future that I had planned, you know. It's like I was planning the suicide, but at the same time, you know, I was making plans to go out to the movies with my friends the next week.
My life was gonna end one way, and that was being addicted to drugs, so why not start now?
I wasn't meant to be on this earth.
Long sleeves, no one knew what was on my wrists.
It was actually on social media. These boys were harassing me about something I did. I couldn't deal with it anymore. Yeah, I actually went through with it. I actually tried to hurt myself.
Those are the moments where I have the best opportunity to plant a seed in someone else's mind. The fact of the matter is, if you don't show some vulnerability, if you don't speak honestly, then there's no truth. And if there's no truth, there's no connection.
It's taken me a very, very long time to even speak openly about it. I think there's a lot of pressure in being vulnerable, especially now with social media and everyone judging you. My roommates don't even know half of this stuff that I'm telling you guys now. And I'm nervous, I'm kind of shaking inside to even talk about it. But if I can even reach 2 people from everything I say or this story, then I did my part in this world.
We don't understand how common it is. We don't understand how important it is to talk about it and be open about it. So this is the problem that we all deal with in secret. And the result is that we don't deal with it well.
Well, we look forward to watching that documentary in April of 2021. Now, on behalf of Vegas PBS and WETA, we thank our panel very much. We thank you, of course, for logging in and being part of this discussion. And also a big thanks to the Vegas PBS staff also for putting this production on. For more resources that we've discussed here, you can visit the Wellbeing website. That is at www.wellbeings.org/Vegas PBS. You can download the free Las Vegas Mental Health Resource Guide that provides local and national support resources. I also wanted to mention that our discussion tonight is being recorded and will also be available on the site soon. And finally, there is a survey we would like you to take. It is in the chat box. The link is in the chat box. So if you could click on that and take that survey, we would appreciate it. It helps us improve these types of events and these types of productions. Thanks again. Very much appreciate your time. Thank you to the panel. Good night.